what's up, everyone? Sam here, Wall Street Mastermind. I'm here today with another client interview for you guys, and a very special guest today, my client Julien, who's honestly one of the most awesome clients I've had the pleasure of working with. But Julien finished his recruiting process. I guess it's been a couple months now, right? We just haven't had a chance to get together till now, but wanted to get him to come on here and just share about his experience a little bit with recruiting and, how it all went down for him. And hopefully, you guys can have some takeaways that'll help you along the way. So, Julien, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. So to start off, Julien, like if you can maybe tell people a little bit about yourself, like just your background and profile and what kind of candidate you are, just so people can kind of get a sense for, uh,
hmm
how you were before you came to Wall Street Mastermind.
Sure. So I guess first I go to the University of Washington. I'm in the business school, which is just the Michael G. Foster School of Business. Um, Candidate-wise or profile-wise, I think I'm pretty strong academically, but I sort of just lacked the guidance sort of recruiting for sort of like any internship really. And so like it was really sophomore year that I decided to pursue like a career in finance. And so that's sort of where my journey began, which is, now that I think of it, a little crazy just because I know that some students start recruiting or start thinking about that like their freshman year, like the day they walk on campus. And so that's where I was in terms of recruitment. And then, school-wise, again, I was pretty strong academically, but I just sort of lacked that guidance that a lot of, I guess, like target schools have for their students.
Yeah. Yeah. When you first started in college, I remember from our first conversation, like you were thinking about either going to
Yeah.
medicine or business, right? It was going to be one of the two.
hmm Yeah. So I knew that I was going to go into like engineering or medicine or business. And just after I took a couple chemistry courses and physics, I knew that if I was going to work like as hard, like all else equal, I might as well go into business just because I just think there's a lot more opportunities. And so I sort of switched tracks, um, started taking business courses my freshman year, and applied to the business major here, beginning of sophomore.
Yeah, got it. And within business, so okay, so then you decided sophomore year that you wanted to do business, and then like what type of experiences did you have on your resume up to that point? Like, were you able to get a lot of, like, I don't know, finance experience working at small investment banks or PE firms, or like what did you have going for you?
Yeah, so really I had nothing. I was part of a couple clubs, just like your typical volunteering club, your typical finance club. I didn't do a freshman year internship just because I took summer classes, and so I had a pretty stark resume.
Mm.
Um, and so, just filling it out, trying to fill it out sophomore year. I was sweating a little just because it was so bare. But that's sort of where I started with.
Got it. Okay. So then, within business, once you decided on business, like what made you, because there's a lot of different directions you could have gone, right? So what
hmm
made you specifically choose investment banking, which is probably like the hardest thing you could have chosen, right? Uh,
Yeah.
what made you become interested in banking?
Yeah, well, I think I guess like just from a major perspective, I knew I wanted to go into finance just because I knew it was sort of like the most complex out of the business majors. It was the most competitive, it had the most upside basically, and I also just thought it was just generally the most interesting as well, as opposed to like HR or like accounting or like operations. I just thought this was the best fit for me. Then the reason I wanted to go to investment banking is because, well, again, I knew it was like most competitive. I wanted the challenge of sort of breaking in from like a non-target school. I actually enjoyed that. I really took it to heart, trying to beat all these other schools. I enjoyed that process, and I just knew that like if you're gonna go in business and work hard, you might as well like be rewarded for it. So why not go into one of the hardest careers to go into?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So then, take us through kind of your recruiting process, and because you joined Wall Street Mastermind, I think in July, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Summer after sophomore year. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you had already been recruiting for a couple of months, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so take us through that like first part of your recruiting process prior to Wall Street Mastermind. Um, I think you had applied to what, like 23 different banks, right?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Um, I want to pull up the document so I can see, but yeah. So I really decided that I wanted to go into IB like February of sophomore year, which is pretty late.
Yeah.
Um, I think the single most important thing is like to start early. But that's sort of like when I was first introduced to it.
Mhm.
And there weren't really like any upperclassmen that had like the same like goals as me, and so it was really just like honestly like a lot of the initial advice I got was like from Wall Street Oasis, just
Mhm.
like online forums and just like, sort of like doing things on my own. But in terms of like starting out, there's no like on campus recruitment or anything like that. There's not really like any guidance sort of that you would find at like target schools, and so going into it, I just like applied to as many banks as I could, thinking I was sort of like hot shit with like my GPA, but I definitely wasn't. So just just learning the ins and out of recruitment like on your own those first couple months can be pretty rough,
Yeah.
especially like if you're the only like student that's like doing it as well. Um, so yeah, just like you see, yeah, all the other banks that I targeted, I applied to like all the bulge brackets, all the middle markets, all the elite boutiques, um, around starting like April. And I know that like RBC Capital Markets has like a resume drop for their San Francisco office at my school, and
Mhm.
that's actually the first interview that I had, and like that was also my first time talking to like an investment banker.
Mhm.
I think my word of advice there is that you don't want that to be your first time. You would sort of want to get those reps in like weeks and months before, and that wasn't the case for me, and so I got absolutely nailed. The guy that was interviewing me was like an accounting major, and he just destroyed me on these really basic technicals that you should know before going in.
Mhm.
But that was sort of like my wake up call, and then after that, it was really didn't really change much. And that's probably also a critical error is that probably like every after every failed interview, you really want to think critically about like what you could have changed. And that's something that I sort of did pretty late in the game, but that's where I started out, I guess.
Got it. So to kind of summarize everything we talked about so far, so you obviously you go to UW, but it's pretty much non-target school. Not a whole lot of kids that get into banking from your school.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a pretty good GPA, but you didn't really have much in terms of relevant experience on your resume, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but at the same time, you were, I guess, a little bit overconfident just because you had good grades and you thought you were gonna totally crush this. Then you applied to like
Right.
all the bulge brackets, all the boutiques, all the middle market banks, like
Right.
20 plus applications. And how many interviews did you have? So you had an interview with RBC, which didn't go well.
Yeah. And then after that, I didn't really hit anything until like July. Yeah, like July after like JPMorgan opened up and like Morgan Stanley and those banks.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So now a whole lot of success. And then in terms of like obviously coming from a non-target school, I'm sure you knew you had to do quite a bit of networking, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how are you going about your networking prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind?
Definitely. So like again, leading up to it, like starting from February until maybe like June, like networking was like a total, not only like a total foreign concept, but I just like really neglected the idea just because like coming from like a sort of sciencey like engineering background, I really like placed way too much importance on like grades and like I guess like pure meritocracy. But I think that one of the biggest learning points for me is that a lot of it depends on like the relationships that you form. And so, like leading up to joining the program, it really was sort of non-existent. But I know like the couple of weeks leading up to joining, I started like ramping up and sending out emails. Um, and so that's like where I was prior to joining.
Okay. So I think that back then you had maybe reached out to, based on my notes, you had reached out to maybe like 20 to 25 people over like
Mm-hmm.
2 to 3 month period, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you weren't really getting response. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, those were really just like informational calls. And those calls were sort of like late in the game as well. Um, but yeah, I wasn't like getting any like hard leads from them.
Got it. Okay. So putting in the effort, but not super fruitful in
Mm-hmm.
and then at the same time, obviously, you were studying for the interviews.
Right.
Um, I had written down that you had spent about 80 to 100 hours on interview prep already. Like you were doing what, like 2 hours a day for a month and a half or something like that.
Yeah, and it definitely was I definitely was like I probably was like also inflating those numbers just because I feared that I was gonna get like blown out of the water, or that you might say that like I should have been practicing double that amount. But really I think it was just sort of inefficient studying, I guess.
Right, because even after 80 to 100 hours of prep, you had the RBC interview, and you realized like how much further you still had to go, basically, because you just got destroyed.
Yeah, so I guess like leading up to the RBC, I really only had like looked at it like honestly like only looked at a couple of questions. I wasn't really practicing at that point just because I just like didn't even know like how intense it was. But after that, I started actually like looking at the questions that were going to be asked.
Hmm. Okay, so then how did you end up finding Wall Street Mastermind?
Yeah, so I think I saw it on like maybe Facebook or Wall Street OS's. I saw like the initial like phone call with you that you could sign up for, and it was completely free. And so I thought, why not? You like have literally nothing to lose, and so I signed up for that. And then the call approaches. We talked for about like 20-30 minutes, just talk about my background, whatnot. Um, and then you sort of like blow me out of the water with like these accounting questions, just because you would ask about my confidence about sort of accounting, mergers and acquisitions, and LBOs. Um, and I definitely gave numbers that were way above where I was at. And so you sort of blew me out of the water there. And that was sort of my wake up call. I was like, wow, I really like need to improve. And I need to improve like fast.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and that's I remember back when, because I think I asked you to kind of rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, all these different areas, and I think most of your answers were like anywhere from like 7 to 9, basically. It's like pretty.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
and then I think if I remember correctly, I probably asked you just like a pretty basic accounting question, and then you couldn't really answer it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's
That's
funny.
exactly how it went down.
It's funny because you're not the only person that uh that ends up doing. Like usually, what happens is a lot of students tend to overestimate where they really are,
Hmm.
and I think the difficulty is like when you don't know what that end goal is, or like when you don't know what that end goal looks like in terms of like what you're trying to get to, it's
Hmm.
really hard for you to figure out just like how far you still have to go, right?
Yeah.
You might think you're almost already there, like, hey, I've been studying for 80 to 100 hours, I put in the work. And for you, like you were, I think I remember you're like, hey, I'm working harder than pretty much everybody else in my school who's trying to do this. And so
Hmm.
like your benchmark that you're comparing yourself to is like the people around you, right?
Right.
Which is not really a good benchmark because those people, most of them probably aren't getting jobs, right?
Right.
And so it's just like to reset that expectation, and like first before you can improve, you got to figure out like where am I falling short, and then what do I actually still need to work on, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's like kind of part of what we help you figure out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of it was just like sort of if you're I guess sort of IB like attracts sort of high achieving individuals, and so you're most likely pretty good at academics, and that over those years that sort of inflated my ego at least,
Mhm.
and so just like seeking help and like sort of admitting faults wasn't really part of my plan,
Right,
but yeah, again, just like knowing like what sort of standard you should be at definitely helped, I think.
right, right. And then, so then we talked, and then obviously you really wanted the program, but then you had to like go talk to your parents about it, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
how was that conversation? Like, was that an easy conversation, or did you have to do a lot of convincing to get your parents on board, or how did that kind of go down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was easy, but I wouldn't say it was hard either. I'm pretty fortunate where my parents are able to sort of support all the decisions that I make, and they knew that this was the most important thing to me, like in my life at that time, and so sort of they were able to support me, or my dad was, and they didn't even know like sort of what investment banking was at the time, but they knew that like I was a hardworking individual, and that like when I sort of asked for things, like which is pretty rare, I'm like sort of pretty serious about it, and so I was pretty fortunate to receive that sort of support.
Mhm.
Um, but I definitely could imagine where like it's a harder conversation to have with like other parents. Um, but yeah.
I think most of the time the difficulty comes from what you just said, which is like most parents have no idea what investment banking is,
Mm-hmm.
and so they don't know what it is. They don't know how difficult the recruiting process is. They don't know that, hey, these bulge bracket or elite boutiques, they accept 1% or less of the candidate pool. Um, they didn't have this type of opportunity back in their days of like, oh, you could just go online and hire a career coach to help you get
Mm-hmm.
one of the most exclusive and prestigious jobs in the world, right? And so one of the common questions that, I don't know if you got this question, but one of the most common questions that our clients get from their parents is like, well, why can't you just get this job on your own? They're like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anyone help me get my job, even though it's totally apples and oranges, right? um,
Mm-hmm.
and so like a lot of times we find that our clients have to, um, the ones who successfully get their parents on board have to do a really good job of providing the right context around why this is important to them, what they've already done on their own. Hey, I've already studied like 80 to 100 hours. This is the result I'm getting. This is what I think I need help with. And then like, what are all the benefits of getting into investment, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of parents, we find they think like if their son becomes an investment banker versus an accountant, it's like the same thing to them.
Yeah, exactly. And also just like I'd probably assume like most parents are just skeptical just because like this program like then and now like I think you're like the only one that I know of like that like does this sort of program. And also just like they're just like asking me like is this like real? Like how do you know like this isn't a scam or something? And just trying to like provide evidence and stuff like that. Uh,
Yeah,
it's
no,
sort of, yeah, that was like sort of difficult as well.
that's a great point. I was just talking to another student a couple days ago, and he was saying like, yeah, my parents have never heard of anything like this before. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't know anyone else that's done something like this, and even like their friends' kids who have gone to banking, like they didn't do anything like this. I'm like, yeah, because I'm the only one that's doing this.
Right.
Like, and our business has only been around for like 2 years or so, right? And we don't work with a lot of people because the way this, but the way we work with our clients is like it's very hands-on. Is we provide a lot of support, but in order to do that, we keep the group pretty small, right? And so it's like I always tell people, it's like a lot of people they've used like admissions consultants for like college applications and things like that, or even for business school applications. This is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like that, but like in that world, very, very normal because there's a ton of admission consultants for colleges and business schools, but
Mm-hmm.
there aren't really anything like that for investment banking, or there isn't really anything like that for investment banking.
Yeah, and I was just about to mention that, like if you're sort of like in that world where where you already like sought out a consultant for your child, like to go into college, and you might be a little more open to like this right now. But like if you're just like your average family that didn't use like consultants for college or anything, then it's just like a completely foreign concept. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so you successfully got your parents on board, then you hopped in the program. Um, and then let's talk a little bit about kind of what we did in the program. Like, what did you find to be helpful for you? Like, what was different about, preparing for recruiting through Wall Street Mastermind versus, whatever it is that you were doing before, like you mentioned previously.
Yeah, I think there are a ton of things that changed and that helped me. I think the first thing was sort of like the resume and cover letter review. I think that was pretty comprehensive. Not only just like formatting, but just like really everything related to the resume. And it obviously helps that you've been a recruiter, so it's not like you were just like making words out of thin air or anything. You actually knew like what was right. And so I think that helped, and that was just really the first step. And I think,
And that's I mean,
yeah,
going back to what you said earlier, because it was extra important for you because it's not like you had a super stacked resume already, right? So
exactly.
it was more just we had to take what you already had, but package it a lot better and to make it
Mm-hmm.
as impressive and as relevant as possible for investment banking, right? Because then
Mm-hmm.
everything else you do, whether it's in networking or any other applications you submit, it's all based on those documents, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just being from like, sort of like a non-target, like everything counts, especially when it comes to like your resume. Um, just like anything that can help you on your resume you want. So yeah, I definitely agree.
But it's always hard for people to kind of envision because, like, I feel like um, most people have already spent a lot of time on it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you did too, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
probably, I don't know, had like a template you got from somewhere, like maybe Wall Street Oasis or something, right? Maybe you even had it looked over, or I don't know if you did, but a lot of students we talked like, oh, they had it looked over by the career center at school or their friends or upperclassmen or whatever. But like, how would you how can you describe like the before and after difference to someone who's just like maybe can't really imagine like how different could it possibly be? Like my resume is already pretty good, right? I've already put a lot of thought into it. Like
Mm-hmm.
what's the biggest thing you think that made it so different?
Yeah, I'd say like I guess like the first thing, just like the formatting. Um, I think I guess first off like the bullet points, right? Just like fixing those using like the word bank that you provided, and also just like small things, just like so like a small thing that I really liked was like extending bullet points at the end of like the page. I think that really made a difference. And it really fills it up, uh, and it like just fills the space. Um, I think that really helped. And also just like another small thing, like the interest section. Usually people only choose like three things, but what you suggested was like filling the entire lineup, just because it gives you more points and more opportunities to connect with your interviewer, and just like small things like that, like around the resume, I think helped a lot. Um, and just trying to like fill space up, especially if you had like sort of a sparse resume like mine, I think that really helped.
Yeah, so it's like visually the first
Mm-hmm.
impression that people get from looking at your resume is a lot different. Like your experiences haven't changed, but
Right.
we just made it seem like you've done a lot more, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And even just like moving things around. Like for example, I didn't have a lot of like actual professional experience, so we just moved like a extracurricular into my professional experience, and it just like made it look better, even though nothing like materially changed. So just things like that.
Got it. Okay, cool. So we fix your resume, and then what do we do after that?
Yeah, so after that, I think for my we did like the fit questions. And so that was just like questions like why banking, to like tell me about yourself, why our bank. Those were like the three big ones.
Mhm.
And then we also did like a questionnaire about like all your different experiences that were pretty. It was pretty comprehensive.
Mhm.
Um, that was sort of like for internally, or I guess just for you. And I think nailing down the why banking, um, and like tell me about yourself questions were probably like the most important part of the entire course. Just because like those answers are like pivotal, and they're like the first question that you get asked. So after the resume review, you do sort of like the fit question, where you it's sort of a back and forth. You submit your answers. He comes back with like suggestions. You make the changes, and it's sort of a back and forth until it's perfected.
Yeah, so we do multiple iterations on all of the questions, all the behaviorals. Um, and I think like, because with the behaviorals, I'm sure you had your own version of your answers before Wall Street Mouse,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you probably had already looked up like, oh, these are the type of questions you have to prepare for and thought through like, oh, this is probably how I would answer these questions, right?
Right.
Um, what was different about like the answers that you have versus the answers that maybe we helped you with?
Yeah, well, I think like the most important thing was like having the perspective of not only somebody else, but somebody else that's actually done recruiting. And so, um, I know like when I was like making my answers up, like without your help, there's just like a lot of information that was like either unnecessary or actually worked against me that we sort of like removed or revised. Um, and just sort of like nailing that down, like going through those iterations and making sure like it's basically pitch perfect. Um, that was like the huge value add. And and also just like making sure that you're like your key points in your story are like pretty solid. Um, and just like sort of pulling information that maybe you hadn't thought of before and like putting that into your story. I think that helped a lot as well.
Yeah, basically, a lot of times students obviously include whatever information that they think works best, right? Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't include it. But since most students have not been through recruiting before for banking,
Right.
and they don't like the biggest thing with the behavioral is just like unlike the technical questions, it's a lot more open-ended and it's a lot more subjective. And most students where they struggle is they don't know what the investment banker is actually wanting to hear, right? Where they don't know what the investment banker is actually looking for. And then in some cases, even like you said, like you might include stuff that's um, at best just like unnecessary, which
Mm-hmm.
makes your answer longer than it needs to be and loses the banker's interest. But at worst, like including information that's actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot and you don't realize it because otherwise you wouldn't have included it in the first place, right?
Right.
And so making sure that we clean up those things so that your pitch to them and the way you're positioning yourself and talking about your experiences and background and strengths and weaknesses and reasons for why you want to do banking and why this bank and whatever it is that they may ask you, that everything is 100% on point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah. I was about to, but I lost it. I'll come back with it though if I remember. If I remember.
Okay. Um, what about on the networking side? Like what do we do with the networking? Because you weren't having a whole lot of success with networking prior to joining, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess leading up to joining the program, I was sending out emails. I think I was pretty good at that part at least. And then just sort of after joining the program, we sort of like refined like your email formats, um, and also just like realizing that sending out like 10 or like 50 emails really isn't that much. Because I remember like I was pretty proud of sending them maybe, I think like, I don't know, like 50 or something. And then you sort of like told me that, oh, okay, well, like the average person actually sends like hundreds. I was like, okay, wow. Okay. Um, and just sort of like realizing that, you need to be like treating like networking, like sending out those emails, finding those emails, basically as like a full-time job. And just sort of having that wake up call was pretty important.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say the average person sends out hundreds, but I think a lot of
Right.
people don't send out enough. But the average client at Wall Street Mastermind sends out hundreds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's not just like it's not as easy as saying, oh well, then let me just go send out hundreds. But it's like having the systems and tools and processes in place to do that in as efficient of a way as possible and
Mm-hmm.
do it scalably, right? And so learning
Mm-hmm.
how to do that, and then um, getting people to actually respond to you, right? Is I think
Right.
the higher your response rate, the fewer people you're gonna have to reach out to accomplish your goals, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then more importantly, like the people who do respond to you and they agree to talk to you, like what do you actually talk to them about?
Right.
Right? Because I always tell people like networking is almost just like another form of interviewing, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're still being evaluated by the banker that you're having these chats with, and your goal is obviously to get them to ultimately refer you for an interview, right?
Right.
But they're not going to do that for just anybody, right? They're not going to do that for almost most of the people that they talk to. And so your goal is to basically be like one of the top candidates out of everybody that they've had to have networking conversations with, so that especially coming from non-target school, you're hoping that that's going to result in you getting an interview, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would you say like your conversations were different before and after you kind of went through our program, or what do you think about?
Yeah, I would say different, mainly because the conversations before were basically non-existent. Um, I hadn't really hopped on the phone like prior to the program. Um, and so like I didn't really know like what to ask or like how to behave essentially, or like what I really should be asking, and just sort of having how to navigate those calls overall. So after the joining the program, and really learning like what question you should be asking, how to sort of like counter like objections. I thought that was pretty useful as well, and just sort of knowing like how to like ask the right questions, um, to like get what you actually want. I think that was pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Um, and then I guess we worked on your resume, worked on your fit questions, worked on your networking, and then the last thing we worked on was obviously your technicals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what did you think about the technical portion?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'll say is that I already come from like a finance background, and so, and I'll just say that like going over the technicals and knowing like what to know exactly, like what to study in order, what not to study, that, or I guess like what's to study last. That was like a tremendous help. And so I could only imagine like how like sort of how fruitful it could be for like a liberal arts major where there isn't a finance option at your school. Um, I think that's the first thing I'll say, and then just the second thing, just um, like knowing what exactly should be said, and just like how long the answer should be, and everything, just like from um, just like counting questions like M&A, uh, and just like being able to ask somebody like what exactly should be said. Because like if you go to like a career counselor or like do a mock interview with your buddy, they'll just say like, okay, yeah, sounds good to me. But if you do the questions with Sam, he'll tell you like if it's like dead wrong, or like if you're missing like a specific piece, and like really anybody else is like outside of recruiting or outside of banking, like wouldn't be able to tell you that piece of information.
So it's basically like the level of feedback you're getting on
Exactly.
how to answer these questions is on a different level. It's a lot more constructive, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you have a good point. Like a lot of times, I mean, students say, "Well, I'll probably just practice my mock interviews with like upperclassmen who have already gone through the process or something," right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm not saying don't do that. Like you should practice as much as you can, but a lot of times, like even the upperclassmen who've just maybe gone through the process once themselves, they're just like
Right.
one step ahead of you. It's not like they're super experienced. They're giving you their opinion on what they think is good or not, when in reality, like sometimes they're missing stuff themselves too, and so
Exactly.
they can't give you the type of feedback that you actually need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus someone who's like been on campus recruiting at a bulge bracket bank, has screened and interviewed and personally helped like probably hundreds of people at this point go through recruiting. The level of experience and knowledge and just the sample size of data is completely different, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just say that like back to your first point, like doing mock interviews with upperclassmen that have been through the process. If you don't have upperclassmen that have been through the process, then it's like your first problem. So I guess like if you come from like a non-target, um, if you have like one or two people that have been through the process but maybe weren't even successful, then you're already like stopping your tracks. And so just having access to like a professional that's actually been in the recruiting process, is super useful. And again, just like knowing, um, like being able to ask and be told what exactly should be said, is super like useful.
Yeah. And obviously, like coming in, you had spent whatever 80 to 100 hours. Probably you were just using what like interview guides and stuff like that you had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like the free ones on like mergers and inquisition and just like Wall Street Oasis questions.
Yeah. And so you were just like probably going through all the questions. There's like hundreds of questions, and you're trying to memorize the answers, and that's typically how most people do it, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
what is different about our approach of learning technicals? Like, because we don't really make you just memorize hundreds of questions, right?
Yeah, I think well, I think the first thing that's different is that you're not like sent like a PDF and just like told to memorize question 1 through 100. You go through these video modules, which I think is super useful. Not only just because it's a lot more comprehensive, but also you just learn better, like listening to a voice and like watching somebody go through the problems themselves. Um, and just like sort of having that video for reference instead of just like a PDF is super useful. Um, and just also going back to my other points, like the order of things that you study, and just like knowing sort of like the importance of each section, um, and sort of like knowing like how comprehensive you should be, or maybe like what's something that you should study last. I thought that was super useful as well.
Got it. So it's like it's like the order of operations obviously is important when it comes to technicals, because
Right.
these concepts kind of build on top of previous concepts, right? And so if you're kind of not learning things in the right order, you don't have like the right foundation to learn the more advanced stuff, right?
Right.
But then the other thing is kind of like I equate it to the difference between self-studying through like reading a PDF interview guide versus what we do is kind of like, why do you go to school, or in school, why do you go to a lecture and learn from a professor? Why do you not just stay home and read a textbook all day, right?
Right.
It's like the amount of information you're actually going to retain and like learn is totally different when you're having an expert explain things to you versus and being able to ask that expert questions versus just like reading something on a page on your own, right? And you might pick up some stuff and then you might you might miss some stuff, but when you miss some stuff, like you don't know you're actually missing it, right?
Yeah, and just going back to your analogy of like attending class, like if you have a textbook, there's like an overwhelming amount of information, and just being able to like ask like should I know this, or being told, or like being able to be told like you don't need to know this is like just again like super useful. And it's also just like an efficient use of time.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the difference between like one is like, okay, memorization. I'm just gonna like brute force this and memorize all the questions and answers, which we don't do, right? What we do is we want our clients to actually learn all of these things conceptually, right? Like
Mhm.
understand the concepts behind these questions so that at the end of the day, it's not about whether you memorize the answer to this question or not. Like they're gonna ask you totally different questions than what you memorized, right? But regardless of what they ask you, since you understand it conceptually and you've internalized this knowledge, you can adapt to pretty much anything they ask you, right? And that, but that's kind of the level you have to get to if you want to pass these super day interviews, right?
Yeah, and I think I'd like to say I sort of had at least a little advantage just because I came from like a finance and accounting background. But I think one of the great things about your videos was you did like examples in the videos, you did multiple examples, and then also if you still weren't sure, you had office hours where you were able to ask questions and you answered them live. So I think that was like super useful as well.
Right, right. Absolutely. Okay, so then obviously I know you after you went to the program, you had like multiple interviews, right? Like do you remember how many firms you ended up interviewing with? Because I knew and you had like you actually had some drama along the way too with some of the firms, right?
Yeah, so I guess I won't name them, but I
Yeah.
think I'm trying to count how many. So I got like the hire review for JPMorgan, Morgan Stanley, in like midsummer or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I as again I like applied to like 35 banks, like all the middle markets, all the elite boutiques, all the bulge brackets, um, with like without much success. And I think one of the things that sort of points to the value from the program is that of the banks that I did interview with, almost like every single one I went to a super day. And I had like a 50 or 40% success rate with super days, which I think is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think like of the banks that I did interview with, I like knocked the interviews like out of the park, I think.
Mhm. And how many offers did you end up getting ultimately?
Yeah, so I ended up getting 3 total offers from a pretty wide range of banks. Um, uh, yeah, because you know, again, I was just like, applying to like every bank under the sun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was pretty happy. We got 3 total offers. Yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. And ultimately, where you ended, where did you end up, or what did you decide to go with?
Definitely, so I'm going to JP Morgan's San Francisco office, blah. And their M&A group, which is I'm totally psyched out for. Like one of the best like groups you can be in. Um, Great bank overall. Super psyched for it. And I also think like I'll touch a little bit on the super day for this. I was talking to like other candidates for that interviewed for this office, and they said that they didn't do like a case study, like an LBO case study, um, and they made me do one. So I thought that was like pretty crazy, and I think that's just like another testament to the program. But feel like it prepares you very well because you know Sam includes like an LBO like module for you to study, um, and just like being on that level of like preparedness, and just being able to like nail everything that they throw at you. It's obviously pretty useful.
Yeah. And by case study, like more specifically, they made you like do an actual LBO on paper in person, right?
Yeah, so it was a video interview. It wasn't anything like crazy, like do like a 3 statement model LBO, 10-year projection. But they did make me do it on pen and paper, no calculator. um, 30 minutes to read and answer the questions. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a curveball, at least.
Right. Yeah. And they didn't do that with the other candidates, but they did with you. So basically,
Yeah,
they went harder on you.
yeah. I don't know what that was about, but
Well, which is a good and a bad thing, right? It's a good thing if you can nail it because then you stand out from the competition, right? But
definitely.
if you don't nail it, then it's like, well, why did I get so unlucky? Like, that's not really fair, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you nailed it, which is great. Um, and obviously, JPMorgan M&A is like one of the best groups out there. They're like always, top three in M&A league tables
Hmm.
every single year, right? Um, were you the only person from your school that got an offer from JP Morgan, by the way?
Yeah. So uh, there are like a couple other students that like got internships at banking or in banks. I guess like I won't name names or like banks, but there were a couple students that went into JP Morgan Chase, which isn't not like the investment banking arm, but just like the other sort of business, I guess. But yeah, I'm the only one in this year they got an offer from JP Morgan.
In investment banking. Right.
Yes, in investment banking specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, JP Morgan Chase is obviously a huge, huge company, and they have
Right.
different divisions and whatnot. But obviously, like the only one we really care about is investment banking. So, okay, so coming from a non-target school, being the only person that got investment banking, I mean, that's a freaking amazing accomplishment. So obviously, huge props to you for making that happen. Um, obviously, I know we helped you along the way, but at the end of the day, you had to do the heavy lifting. Right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're here to coach you, but like if you didn't put in the work and you didn't actually do what we asked you to do, you wouldn't have gotten the results, right? It's not like a magic bullet or whatever.
Yeah, I know. Like, I hate the cliche example, but like I guess you can only show me the doors. Like, the students have to walk through it. But like Sam isn't gonna make you. He's not gonna make. It's not gonna be like a Slumdog Millionaire story. You have to put in the work. You actually have to be like driven. And actually like want to do it to succeed.
Right,
Which I think is pretty important.
right. That's awesome, man. Any last minute advice for people who are, maybe in similar situations as you, like maybe they go to a non-target school, maybe they're like pretty good students and they have good GPAs, but they don't have like a whole ton of relevant experience, or maybe they start a little bit late. Like, what would you say to those people in terms of what they should be doing?
Yeah, I guess if you're not going to go into a program, just be like reading all the resources online you can, and also just think of the program as like an investment. Or I guess like specifically like a net present value calculation, right? It's obviously an investment, but like if you think about it, um, like the money that you'll spend to go into a program, it could be like the difference between like attending a better school. And so if you think of it that way, it's almost like you're investing like for on-campus recruiting. Um, and also just like in the future, like as an analyst, the money that you'll be making can like easily pay like for your initial investment. And so if you're like a serious student and you're actually driven, then like it's just like a wise decision. But like if you're just gonna like goof off, um, or just like waste your time, then you probably won't even be like accepted into the program initially anyway. So
Right, because we actually, that's a good point, which is most people don't know this, but we actually don't work with every single student that comes and reaches out to us, right? Because like we try to only take people on that we know are gonna be serious and do the work, and that most importantly, we have to be confident that we can help them get the job, right? And I think like
right,
when I talked to you, even though I knew that you hadn't been getting results on your own and you had applied to all these places and you got destroyed in your RBC interview and whatever, um, I knew from our conversation that if you just had the right help, you would do what was necessary to get it done, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
and you proved us right, right? By getting 3 offers in the end, which is obviously phenomenal. A lot of people would uh, give a right arm just to have 1 offer, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you're absolutely right. It's like it's an investment, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, hey, if you come from a non-target school and you're already disadvantaged, right, relative to your competition. And by the way, a lot of times, I mean, students that go to non-target schools not because they weren't smart enough to go to a target school. A lot of times it was because, maybe there's like financial reasons or personal
Mm-hmm.
reasons, like they needed to be close to home or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or like and they didn't know how important it was going into college, because it's not like most people don't know that they want to do banking as a
Right.
right. And so
Right.
now that you realize like how important going to target school is, and you're behind, it's like you need to figure out how you can get an edge um, that's going to even the playing field a little bit, or even help you surpass your competition at these other places, right? I'm sure, like, I don't know if you know who else is going to be working with you at JPMorgan in San Francisco, but I'm going to guess that when you show up there for work, like most of the other kids probably came from target schools, right?
Definitely.
And
Um,
so you're like an underdog, but like once you make it there though, like that's where you're starting your career. And after that, like nobody really cares when you went to school, where you went to school, right? Everybody's just gonna see like, oh, Julien started his career at JP Morgan M&A, and then like you're pretty much set for the rest of your career in terms of like exit opportunities and whatnot, right?
right. Yeah, and just sort of like I'm sure like if you're like exploring investment banking, um, you probably like discovered Wall Street Oasis and you're like aware of like what on campus recruiting is, but like you really won't know like how crazy the advantage that those students have. Like they have banks like every bank on Wall Street coming to their campus recruiting directly. Not only that, they just have like tons of resources from like legitimate programs after school, from tons of like previous students, and like the alumni networks are just crazy. Um, and so just realizing that like this is a pretty good investment and it's like one of the best like tools that you have, especially if you don't have like those resources that those target schools have. Um, it's just like that's just something to think about, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Awesome. Well, look, guys, I think Julian gave you a lot of really, really awesome advice over the past hour or so. So definitely want to thank him for taking the time to come on here to do that. I think, the biggest takeaway for you guys is like, hey, even if you know, are disadvantaged because you go to a non-target school or you don't have a whole lot of relevant experience, or maybe you've been putting in a lot of work, like, tens, if not hundreds of hours on your own, studying for interviews, networking, applying to, 20, 30, 40, however many banks, and you're just not seeing the results. Um, that doesn't really mean that like you're not good enough, or that doesn't mean that you're not cut out for this, right? What it actually does mean is that you're you have the work ethic and you have the drive to do this, but you're just not spending your time on the right things or doing things in the right way, right? And you're not being as efficient as you could have been, and not being as effective as you need to be, right? And so in situations like that, um, rather than giving up, what you should do is reach out and get the help that you need, right? And get the best quality help that you could possibly get, because at the end of the day, what you are trying to do is extremely difficult, right? Like the degree of difficulty is pretty much higher than any other job you could possibly go for. And so the margin for error is so small that you don't want to just leave it up to chance or say, well, doing X, Y, or Z is going to be good enough. You want to maximize your chances. You want to take your best shot and just like leave it all out there, right? And at the end of the day, like if you've done that, um, whatever the result may be, like you can live with that, right? And more likely than not, if you have the work ethic and you have the drive and determination, and then you have the proper guidance that you need, then you're probably going to get to the outcome that you want, right? And oftentimes it's going to be a very, very phenomenal outcome, just like Julien has got. So, if you can relate to kind of what Julien went through, or if any of this resonates with you, and you guys want to learn more about whether you're eligible for the program, like I said, we don't really work with everybody, but we have to feel confident that you're the type of person we can actually get the result for. I would encourage you to reach out and schedule a call with our team. Like Julien said, that first call is free, so you have absolutely nothing to lose, right? And on this call, what we will do is we're going to ask you questions about your situation, figure out what it is that you're struggling with and what you need help with, and also learn more about your goals and aspirations and what you're trying to accomplish. And then, like, depending on what you tell us, we may or may not be the best person to help you. Like, I'll be completely honest, like, sometimes I won't be the best person to help you, but if that's the case, like, our team, we operate with total integrity, and we're going to tell you that, right? And we're going to point you in another direction that we think is going to serve you best. But if we can help you, then we will absolutely be thrilled to help you and, hopefully get you an outcome that's better than anything you could do on your own, for sure, right? So if you're interested in doing that, you can schedule this call by going to wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street and the URL is abbreviated to ST. So it's stmastermind.com/apply. And, we'll get on, talk to you about it, give you, at a minimum, give you some advice that you can walk away with and implement on your own. But at most, you end up becoming a part of our program, and we help you kick some ass in the recruiting process. But either way, it's a win-win. So we look forward to talking to you guys. And Julien, again, want to thank you so much for just taking the time to hop on this call and share your experiences with people. And I'm sure a lot of people will find it super valuable.
Of course, yeah, the pleasure's mine.
Awesome, man. And, look forward to seeing everything you accomplish as you start your journey in investment banking. And definitely, stay in touch and don't be a stranger. And we'll love to see all the success going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely stay in touch, and thank you again.
Yeah, man, absolutely. All right, guys, that'll be it for today, and we'll be back again with more of these in the near future. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.